I was looking forward to getting home. You know that feeling, right? After a long day of running around at work, you just want to kick back, stretch your legs, maybe order some pizza, and watch a few episodes of that crime show we've been into. That's what I had in mind when I slid into the driver's seat, ready to call it a day. It was supposed to be a quiet ride home with Elijah, just the two of us, no distractions. But, of course, he always had other plans. "Hey Sam," Elijah said, his voice a little too upbeat for the time of day. I looked over at him, and there was that familiar grin, the one that made me suspicious of whatever was coming next. "Yeah." I glanced over briefly, just enough to see his eyes lighting up like he'd had a few too many shots of caffeine. "I was thinking," he continued, "a few of us are meeting up at McGregor's tonight. You know, that dive bar by the office. We could swing by for a bit." I groaned inwardly. McGregor's? Really? My feet were aching, and I was so ready to just get home. I could already picture the couch, the soft throw blanket, the pizza box I'd left in the fridge. All I wanted was to relax, to forget the day for a minute. "Sam," Elijah pressed, his voice shifting into that tone he always used when he was trying to push me into something I wasn't too keen on. "Come on, man, just for a little while. You've been working hard. You need to unwind. And everyone's asking about you." I raised an eyebrow, feeling that familiar irritation stir up. "Your friends miss me?" I asked, skeptical. I mean, come on. He was always out with them, getting drinks, cracking jokes. They barely seemed to notice when I wasn't around. "Of course they do," he said, a little too quickly. "They've been asking about you. Don't be such a buzzkill." I couldn't help but sigh. I knew how this would go. Elijah would keep at it until I gave in, and I was too tired to argue. "Fine," I muttered, gripping the wheel a little tighter. "Let's get it over with." And just like that, we were headed to McGregor's. I knew what was coming. Another night of me being the quiet one, sitting at the bar with my drink, while Elijah worked the room like he always did. The guy had this way of getting everyone's attention, no matter where we were. And me? I was just his tag-along. I'd learned to accept it by then, but it didn't mean I liked it. As we pulled into the parking lot, the neon sign of McGregor's flickered above us, casting this cold, almost eerie light across the wet pavement. The kind of place you walked into and instantly regretted the decision, but you were already there, so what else could you do? The door swung open, and the sound of chatter and laughter hit me like a wave. Familiar faces, sure, but none of them really felt like my people. I didn't even get a chance to sit before Elijah was off, pulling people into conversations, cracking jokes, the center of attention as usual. I slid onto a bar stool, ordered a drink, and watched him work the crowd. His voice was too loud, too animated. I, on the other hand, just sipped my beer, tried to make myself comfortable. It wasn't that I hated hanging out with his friends. I just didn't know why he always had to drag me along to these things, especially when I wasn't feeling up to it. "Hey Sam, you good?" Elijah called out across the room, flashing a grin as if he couldn't go 2 minutes without checking on me. Yeah. "I'm good," I said, forcing a smile. But I wasn't. It was like this every time we went out. Me on the sidelines, just tagging along while Elijah reveled in the attention. Maybe I was overthinking it, but something about the way he acted around them felt off. It wasn't just his usual charm. There was something else lurking under the surface, something I couldn't quite put my finger on yet. The night dragged on, and I started to feel that familiar feeling creep up on me, the feeling of being out of place. Elijah was on fire, cracking jokes, getting everyone to laugh, and I was just there. I didn't know why I always felt this way when we went out with his friends, but tonight it was stronger than usual. Maybe it was the way his laugh sounded a little too forced, or how he kept glancing at his phone, only to shove it back in his pocket the second I looked over. I figured he was just checking work emails or something, but there was an itch in the back of my mind I couldn't scratch. I finished my drink and ordered another, trying to focus on something. Anything that could take my mind off how uncomfortable I was. But it wasn't working. Not tonight. By the time the clock hit midnight, the place was buzzing louder, more chaotic. People had gotten a few drinks in them, and the energy shifted from casual chatting to full-blown party mode. Elijah was at the center of it all, of course. People were crowding around him, laughing, slapping him on the back, while I sat at the bar, my drink growing warm in front of me. I couldn't help but notice how many of the women seemed to be hanging around him a little too much, laughing at jokes that weren't that funny, touching his arm a bit too often. My stomach tightened. Maybe it was just the alcohol or the late hour, but it made my blood run cold. Then, I saw it. He was talking to a woman I didn't recognize. She had this long blonde hair, and the way she stood so close to him made something in my gut twist. I didn't want to be the jealous husband, but something about the whole scene just didn't sit right. Elijah was leaning in, laughing a little too intimately, his hand resting on her shoulder. She was smiling at him like she knew something I didn't, and my heart sank. I tried to shake it off, telling myself I was overreacting. But as the night dragged on, I couldn't get rid of the nagging feeling that something was going on behind my back. Maybe it was my own insecurities. Maybe I was just tired. But whatever it was, I couldn't shake the thought that Elijah was keeping something from me. Sam. Elijah's voice broke through my thoughts. I looked up, and there he was, standing with that woman. No, smiling with that woman, his arm around her waist in a way that made my jaw clench. She was practically hanging off him, whispering something into his ear, and for the first time in a long time, I felt the sting of jealousy burn hot in my chest. Sam, you good? Elijah asked again, his smile a little too wide now, like he was trying too hard to keep things casual. I forced a smile, swallowing down the bitter taste in my mouth. Yeah, I'm fine. Just tired. I turned to take a sip of my drink, trying to hide the fact that my hands were shaking. But I couldn't ignore the gnawing feeling anymore. Something wasn't right. It was like everything had shifted, and I was starting to realize I wasn't the only one in the room who was keeping secrets. As the night wore on, I found myself more and more on edge. Elijah's laughter rang in my ears, but it didn't sound like his usual carefree laugh. It was sharp, almost forced. He was still talking to that woman, her hand lightly brushing his arm as they shared some inside joke I wasn't a part of. My stomach churned every time I caught a glimpse of them. I tried to keep myself distracted. I was sipping on my drink, checking my phone, pretending that nothing was bothering me, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being an outsider in my own life. I looked around at his friends, at the ones who had been telling me how much they missed me earlier in the night. They were all hanging on his every word, laughing a little too hard at everything he said. It was like they were all in on some joke I wasn't invited to. A few minutes later, Elijah came back to where I was sitting, his eyes a little wider than usual, like he had too much energy. Hey man, why don't you come hang with us? You're looking like a statue over here. I almost didn't want to look at him. Something in his eyes made me feel uneasy, like he was trying to cover something up. I had that nagging feeling again, the one that told me I wasn't being paranoid, that I wasn't imagining things. I could feel the tension in my neck, the pressure in my chest. I'm good, I said, forcing a grin. Just want to chill for a bit. You go ahead. Elijah gave me that smile of his, the one that always made me question if he was being honest or just humoring me. Alright, well, if you change your mind, we'll be out back. He walked off toward the back door, the woman trailing behind him, her laughter carrying through the room. I couldn't stop myself from watching them. It wasn't like I was trying to be that guy, the one who was overly suspicious or controlling, but something in the way she hung on him, the way she touched his arm, it felt too familiar. I could feel my blood pressure rising, my hands tightening around my drink. It wasn't just the flirtation, I could handle that. It was the way Elijah seemed to be feeding into it, like he didn't have a care in the world. Like he was loving the attention, and I wasn't even part of it. A few minutes passed, and I could feel the air in the room getting thicker. I started to look for an excuse to leave, but the truth was, I didn't want to leave without knowing what was going on. I didn't want to let this feeling go just yet. If I left now, I'd just be running away from the truth, and deep down, I knew that was exactly what Elijah wanted me to do. Before I could make up my mind, I saw Elijah walk out the door with that woman, and I knew right then that I had to follow. Something inside me, call it gut instinct or whatever, told me I wasn't imagining things. They were up to something, and I was done being left in the dark. I waited for a few moments to make sure no one was looking, then I slipped out the side door and followed them into the alley. I didn't know what I was expecting, but what I found was worse than anything I could have imagined. The alley behind McGregor's was dimly lit, the flickering neon light from the bar barely reaching the shadows. I stayed close to the wall, trying to keep quiet, hoping they wouldn't notice me. My heart was beating faster now, like it knew something I didn't. I could hear Elijah's voice from a distance, but it was muffled by the thick air between us. He was talking, laughing with her again. Her laugh rang out, like it was designed to draw attention. It cut through the silence, and I felt my blood run cold. I took a slow step forward, careful not to make any noise. They were just ahead, standing close to a dumpster, too wrapped up in their conversation to notice me. But I noticed something. Elijah's arm was around her waist. No, more than that. He was holding her there, his hand resting a little too low, too comfortable. They were talking, but their voices were low now, more intimate. Her hand brushed against his chest, and I could see her leaning in, like she was waiting for something, like she was expecting something. I froze. A million thoughts ran through my head all at once, but there was one that cut through all the noise. This is happening. I should have turned around and left right there. I should have walked back inside, pretended I didn't see anything, let them have their moment, and then head home to try and forget it. But I couldn't. The image of Elijah with her, so open, so comfortable, made my stomach twist into knots. It wasn't just the betrayal. It was the way he looked at her, like I wasn't even a thought in his mind. Like I wasn't even there. I stepped closer, just a few feet away now. I wasn't sure what I was going to do or say. I hadn't planned on confronting him tonight. I was just following my gut, hoping to get some kind of answer, but now that I was here, I couldn't just stand by and watch. Then, I heard Elijah's voice again, clearer this time. He said something, his tone a little softer than usual, almost like he was flirting. "You've been so great tonight. I'm glad you came out." The woman smiled, running her fingers along his arm. "Yeah, me too." There was a pause, and then she added, "You're not with her tonight, are you?" The question hung in the air like a weight. I could see Elijah hesitate for just a moment, like he didn't quite know how to answer. But then he laughed, that stupid, careless laugh that made my stomach churn. "No, Sam's not really the party type." He said it like I wasn't even a person. Like I was some sort of background noise, someone he could ignore when it suited him. I couldn't take it anymore. I stepped forward, my feet heavy on the gravel, and I heard Elijah's voice crack mid-sentence when he finally saw me. "Sam?" His face shifted, like he wasn't expecting me, like he thought he could keep this whole thing under wraps. The woman turned to look at me, her expression suddenly defensive, like she knew she was caught. But Elijah? He just stood there, looking at me with wide eyes, his smile fading into something I couldn't quite place. Guilt? Fear? Or maybe just annoyance that his little secret had been exposed. "What's going on here, Elijah?" I asked, my voice steady, but the anger was bubbling up underneath. I was trying to keep it together, but everything inside me was screaming. Elijah didn't answer right away. He shifted uncomfortably, running a hand through his hair, like he was caught between apologizing and making up some excuse. The woman looked at me with an air of superiority, her lips curling into a tight smile. I could feel my fists clench at my sides, the frustration rising. I had been here for hours, sitting at that bar, watching him play everyone, watching him smile like nothing was wrong. And here it was. The truth. Right in front of me. "What the hell is this?" I repeated, stepping closer, feeling that familiar mix of confusion and rage flooding me. "Elijah, what's going on? Why the hell are you with her?" He opened his mouth, like he was going to say something, but then he just shut it again, looking down at the ground for a second. "Sam," he finally said, voice low, "it's not what you think." He sounded almost defensive, like he was still trying to protect the lie, even when the truth was staring him in the face. I scoffed. "Not what I think. Really? You're standing here with her. Don't even try to act like I'm stupid." The woman stepped forward now, almost too eager to speak, like she had something to prove. "Oh, come on. Don't be so dramatic," she said, her voice laced with sarcasm. "It's just a little fun." A little fun? My whole world felt like it was falling apart. Everything I had trusted, everything I had believed about Elijah, about us, was crumbling in front of me, and she had the audacity to call it fun? Fun? I shot back, shaking my head. "Is that all this is to you? Fun?" Elijah didn't say anything more. He just stood there, looking from me to her, unsure of how to get out of this mess he'd made. But there was no way out now. The mask had slipped, and I wasn't going to pretend like everything was fine anymore. Not tonight. Not after this. "You're done, Elijah," I said, my voice cold, final. "We're done." And I turned, leaving him standing there in the alley with his betrayal exposed for the world to see. The door slammed behind me as I walked back toward the bar. My mind was a blur of rage and disbelief. I didn't even care if anyone saw me leaving. If Elijah wanted to play his little games, he could do it without me. My chest felt like it was being crushed, and the only thing I could hear was the pounding of my own heartbeat, echoing in my ears. I didn't look back. I didn't have to. I knew Elijah wasn't far behind me, probably still trying to come up with some excuse for what had just happened. I heard his footsteps quicken as he caught up with me, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. "Sam, wait." His voice cracked, a little desperate, and I could hear the panic in it. I almost wanted to laugh. Where was that desperation when he was wrapped up in some other woman's arms? I didn't answer. I just kept walking, faster now, toward my truck in the parking lot. My keys were in my hand, my fingers tight around them. "Sam, please, just listen." Elijah's voice was closer now, and I could hear him breathing hard as he tried to keep up with me. I stopped in front of the truck and spun around to face him. My breath was coming in short bursts, my whole body shaking, but I was done pretending. Done with the silence, done with the lies, done with the hurt. "What the hell do you want me to say, Elijah?" I shouted, the words spilling out before I could stop them. "You think you can just pull this crap on me and I'm supposed to act like everything's fine? Like I didn't see you with her? Like I didn't know exactly what was going on?" Elijah stood there, stunned. For a moment, he just looked at me, like he didn't even recognize me. Like he wasn't sure how to handle this version of me, the one who wasn't going to take his bullshit anymore. "I didn't mean for it to happen like this," he said, his voice quieter now. "Sam, it's complicated." "Complicated?" My hands balled into fists at my sides. "Complicated?" "No, Elijah, it's not complicated. You lied to me. You used me. You thought I wouldn't find out, didn't you?" I was so angry, my words were coming out in jagged bursts, but I didn't care. This needed to be said. It needed to be out in the open. Elijah's face twisted, his jaw tightening. He ran a hand through his hair like he always did when he was trying to figure out how to spin the truth. "It's not like that, Sam," he said again, softer now, but the words felt empty. "I didn't mean to hurt you. You know how much I care about you." I didn't want to hear it. I didn't want to hear any of his half-assed excuses or his desperate attempts to play the victim. "You care about me?" I repeated, voice low, a bitter laugh escaping me. "Is that what this is? You care about me so much that you slept with another woman behind my back? You care about me so much that you dragged me into this hellhole of a bar, lied to my face, and then tried to make it my fault?" I shook my head. "No. You don't get to do that. You don't get to hurt me and then pretend like I'm the one who's overreacting." For a moment, there was silence between us. The only sound was the hum of the city, the distant chatter of the bar crowd, and the steady rhythm of my own breathing. Elijah stood there, like he didn't know what to do with himself, his shoulders slumped. "I'm sorry," he finally said, but it sounded hollow. "I never meant for you to find out like this." "You never meant for me to find out?" I spat, taking a step forward. "You think I'm stupid? You think I wouldn't notice the way you were acting? The way you were talking to her? Touching her? You think I'm that blind, Elijah?" He opened his mouth like he was going to say something else, but I didn't want to hear it. I wasn't going to give him the chance to twist the story, to play the poor me card again. "You're done," I said, my voice shaking but firm. "I'm done. I don't care what your excuse is. I'm done. I don't want to hear it." Elijah stood frozen for a moment, looking like he was trying to find something, anything, to say to fix it. But there was nothing. Not anymore. I turned and yanked open the door to my truck. My hands were still shaking, and I could barely get the key into the ignition. But I wasn't going to cry. Not yet. Maybe later when I was alone, but not now. Not with him standing there, still trying to justify what he'd done. I started the engine and slammed the door shut, the sound loud in the silence of the parking lot. Elijah didn't say anything more. He didn't try to stop me. He just stood there, his eyes wide, watching me drive away. And as I pulled out of the parking lot, I didn't feel the anger anymore. It had been replaced with something else. Emptiness. I wasn't angry anymore. I was just done. I didn't know what I was going to do next. But I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let Elijah break me. Not this time. I drove. I didn't know where I was going. I didn't care. The night air was cold against my skin when I rolled down the window, but it felt like the only thing that could keep my mind from completely spinning out of control. The streetlights blurred as I sped past them, the headlights of other cars flashing by in the dark. Everything felt so far away, so distant. The life I thought I had, the man I thought I knew, gone just like that. I didn't want to go home. I couldn't face that place, that house we had built together, the one where we'd laughed, argued, and made plans for the future. It all felt so fake now. Like everything was just a stage, and I was the last to know the play had already ended. I pulled into a parking lot by the river, where the city lights flickered off the water. The place was quiet, empty, except for a few parked cars in the distance. I switched off the engine, but I didn't get out. I just sat there, staring at the river. I could still see Elijah's face in my mind, his shocked expression when I told him we were done. But it wasn't just the shock that hurt. It was the realization that I had never mattered to him the way I thought I did. All the years, all the moments I had believed in, trusting him like a fool, and he had been lying to me the whole time. I had been just another person in his life to manipulate, another face in the crowd that he could toss aside when he got bored. I hated myself for not seeing it sooner. I thought about calling a friend, but I couldn't. I didn't want to talk to anyone. Not yet. What would I even say? How could I explain what had just happened? There were no words for this kind of betrayal, no quick fixes. I needed time to process it all, but even then, I didn't know where to start. I pulled out my phone and stared at the screen for a long time. Elijah had texted me a few times. Nothing important, just apologizing over and over again. I couldn't bring myself to read them. The words didn't matter anymore. I'd heard all the excuses, all the fake apologies before. They were just words. Empty, meaningless words. Eventually, I switched my phone off. I didn't want to hear from him. I didn't want him to try and explain himself anymore. He had his chance, and he blew it. I got out of the truck, my boots crunching against the gravel as I walked toward the riverbank. The cold air bit at my face, but I welcomed it. It was like everything around me was still, frozen in time, and for the first time in hours I felt nothing. It wasn't peace. It wasn't calm. It was just silence. I sat down on a bench by the water, my mind still racing, but I didn't let myself think about Elijah anymore. I just needed space. The quiet of the night was strangely comforting. For a while, I just sat there, staring out over the river, watching the reflections of the city lights ripple across the surface. I didn't have the energy to cry, and honestly, I didn't want to. Not yet. I was tired of being weak. Tired of feeling like I couldn't trust the one person I'd given everything to. I didn't want to say it out loud, but I knew deep down, this was it. This was the end of us. There was no going back after this. Elijah had shown me who he really was, and the truth was, I didn't like what I saw. After a while, I stood up, wiped the dirt from my pants, and got back in the truck. I didn't have a plan. I didn't have a destination. I just knew that I wasn't going back to him, and I wasn't going back to the life I thought I had. The drive home was long, but I took my time. I didn't rush. I didn't feel like there was anywhere I needed to be. I just let the road take me wherever it wanted to go, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was in control of my own life. When I finally pulled up to the house, I just sat there for a moment, looking at it. The lights were off, the place was silent, like it was waiting for me to make a decision. And I knew, without a doubt, that the decision had already been made. I wasn't going back to Elijah. Not in the way he wanted. Not in the way I had before. There was no more pretending. There was no more trust. I had to let him go. For good. I walked inside, my shoes clicking against the hardwood floor as I made my way to the bedroom. Everything felt different now. Like the air was thinner, colder. The bed was still made, his side untouched, just the way we had left it this morning. But it wasn't my bed anymore. It wasn't our bed. It was just a place where I had slept next to a man who didn't deserve my love. And as I stood there, looking at the empty space where he used to be, I realized something. I wasn't broken. I wasn't weak. I was just done. I wasn't ready to move on. But I was ready to take the first step toward healing. And that was enough for tonight. The next few days felt like a fog. The hours seemed to stretch on forever, yet none of it felt real. Everything around me, my house, my things, even the people at work, was just background noise. I was numb. I was angry. I was all over the place. But one thing was clear. I wasn't going to let myself stay stuck in this mess. I couldn't. Elijah had made sure of that when he pulled the rug out from under me. I didn't hear from him for a while. At first, I didn't know whether that was a relief or just another piece of the puzzle I didn't want to face. But after the silence stretched on for a day or two, it started to feel different. It was like the weight of his absence was pressing down on me, like I was waiting for something to happen. Something to break. I kept my phone off most of the time, only turning it on to check work emails or make sure nothing urgent was coming through. But the longer I kept it off, the easier it was to ignore the guilt that gnawed at me. There were moments when I missed the idea of Elijah, the person I thought he was. And it made me feel weak. Stupid. Like I was mourning a lie. But then I'd remember the alley. His face when I confronted him. The way he stood there, trying to act like nothing had happened. Like he hadn't just shattered everything we had. And it would bring me back. Bring me right back to the anger. To the realization that I wasn't going to beg for someone to love me. Not anymore. I decided to clear some space in my mind, take a break from it all. I grabbed my keys one evening and drove out to a small diner I used to like. The kind of place with bad coffee and greasy burgers, where the waitress doesn't try too hard to be friendly, but you get your food fast and it's exactly what you needed. I sat at a corner booth, nursing a cup of coffee, staring out the window as the rain started to fall. That was the first time I realized something. I wasn't just angry at Elijah anymore. I was angry at myself. Angry for all the times I had let things slide. Angry for all the little signs I ignored because I didn't want to believe the truth. I took another sip of coffee, and the bitterness didn't just come from the cup. It was a bitterness that had built up over years. I had spent so much time trying to convince myself everything was fine, that we were fine, that I didn't see what was happening right in front of me. Elijah wasn't just betraying me in that alley. He had been betraying me for months. Maybe even longer. When I finally made it home that night, I felt different. Like I was starting to wake up from a long, painful dream. I didn't feel as lost as I had when I first walked away. The fog was beginning to clear. And that's when I got the text. It was from Elijah. "Sam, please talk to me. I need to explain. I'm sorry." I stared at the message for a long time, feeling the familiar ache in my chest. I didn't want to deal with him. I didn't want to hear whatever excuse he was about to offer. I knew what I'd find. More lies, more promises he couldn't keep. But as the seconds ticked by, I felt my hand reach for my phone. I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. I wanted to type something snarky. I wanted to tear him apart with words. I wanted to scream at him for making me feel like this. But then, I remembered something. I wasn't doing this for him. I wasn't doing this for some apology or explanation. I was doing this for me. For my own peace. For my own closure. I didn't reply right away. Instead, I put the phone down and walked over to the couch, sitting in the dim light. The quiet was loud in my ears. I knew the conversation was coming. The one where I would finally confront him. Where I would finally end it for good. But for now, I let the silence settle in around me. For once, it didn't feel suffocating. It felt like freedom. The next morning, Elijah called. I stared at the screen, watching his name flash, and for a moment, I hesitated. I wasn't sure what I expected from the conversation. Maybe I thought he'd beg for forgiveness, or maybe I thought I'd finally hear the truth. But whatever it was, I wasn't ready for what came next. I picked up the phone. Sam, Elijah's voice sounded strained, but there was something else in it. Something I hadn't expected. Elijah, stop, I cut him off. Don't even try to apologize. Don't try to explain yourself. You've already shown me who you are. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then, softly, almost as if he was giving up, he said, I never wanted to hurt you, Sam. I laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. But you did. And I'm done. Don't call me again. I hung up the phone before he could say another word. I wasn't sure if I was ready for what came next, or if I was even fully healed. But I knew one thing. I was done waiting for Elijah to fix what he'd broken. I was done waiting for closure that wasn't coming. I had to make my own peace. And with that, I knew I was ready to take the next step forward, even if I wasn't sure where it would lead. The weeks that followed were quieter, in a way. Elijah's calls tapered off. His apologies turned to nothing more than empty noises in my head. It was easier to ignore him as time went on, but that didn't mean the pain went away. It just got quieter, tucked into the corners of my mind like a shadow that wouldn't leave. It's strange, you know? How one person can dominate so much of your life, and then, when they're gone, it feels like a giant hole that you're supposed to fill up, but you don't know how. I stayed busy, filled my days with little distractions. Work, the gym, and small tasks around the house. I threw myself into everything I could, just to avoid sitting with the silence. There were moments, though, when the silence would find me. I'd be sitting on the couch, watching some show that didn't matter, and the emptiness would hit me like a punch to the gut. I would catch myself, just for a second, wishing things were different. Wishing I had never caught him. Wishing I didn't have to make this choice. But the thing was, I didn't really have a choice anymore, did I? Every time the guilt or doubt crept in, I reminded myself of the alley, of the way I felt when I saw Elijah with her. His hand on her waist, the way he looked at her, like I didn't even exist. I couldn't unsee it, and the more I remembered, the more I realized I was better off without him. He had betrayed me, and even if he was sorry now, it didn't change the fact that he had done it. It didn't change the fact that he had used me. I remember one morning, I woke up and thought, okay, today's the day. I got out of bed and stood in front of the mirror for a while, just looking at myself. The man I saw in the reflection wasn't broken. He was just different. He was scarred, sure, but he wasn't defeated. Not yet. I wasn't going to let Elijah win by making me feel small, by making me doubt my own worth. No, I was going to reclaim myself, piece by piece. The first thing I did was cancel the cable. The next was canceling the stupid subscription to that streaming service we used to share. It wasn't about the money. It was about cutting ties. It was about taking back control over the parts of my life that he had once invaded. I even got rid of a few of the things around the house that reminded me of him. His stupid leather jacket that always hung by the door, the framed picture of us at that stupid beach trip from 2 summers ago. It wasn't about the memories. It was about making a new space for myself. One that didn't have him in it. It wasn't easy. There were nights when I wanted to text him, to hear his voice again, to hear him tell me everything was going to be okay. But I stopped myself. Every time. Because I knew better now. I wasn't going to fall into that trap. I wasn't going to let myself be the one who had to pick up the pieces of a broken relationship that he broke. Not anymore. A few weeks passed, and I started feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. It wasn't full of fireworks or dramatic realizations. It wasn't even something I could point to and say, there. That's where it turned around. But it was there, slowly creeping in. Maybe it was the way I'd stopped feeling sick to my stomach when I saw his name pop up on my phone. Maybe it was the way I'd started enjoying the little things again. The quiet mornings with coffee, the evenings spent walking by the river, the time I spent on my own. And then, one evening, I got a message from an old friend, someone I hadn't talked to in months. Her name was Jenna. She was a woman I had worked with years ago, but we'd lost touch after I'd started spending more time with Elijah and his circle of friends. Funny how that happens, huh? You think you're building something, but you end up letting go of everything else. Anyway, Jenna asked if I wanted to grab a drink that weekend. I almost didn't reply. Part of me felt like I wasn't ready to meet new people. To be myself again. But I pushed the doubt aside and sent her a quick text back. Sure, I'd love that. And that night, I found myself in a little bar, sitting across from someone who had no idea what I'd just gone through. No clue about Elijah or what he'd done. I realized that I had been so wrapped up in my past that I had forgotten what it was like to just enjoy someone's company without baggage. Jenna made me laugh. She listened when I spoke. She didn't judge me or ask me stupid questions about how I was holding up. It was just normal. And I hadn't felt that in so long. It wasn't a sign that I was over everything, but it was a sign that I was healing. That maybe I could have a life again. A life that didn't revolve around betrayal. A life where I wasn't constantly checking my phone, waiting for Elijah's next message, or wondering where he was. I wasn't going to let him dictate my every move anymore. The next few weeks were a blur. I spent more time with Jenna, reconnected with old friends, and started picking up things I used to enjoy before I became so consumed by Elijah and his drama. I went for long walks. I read books. I even joined a local gym, something I'd told myself I'd do for years but never had the time for. I was starting to feel like me again. There were still moments, late at night, when the silence was too heavy, when the memories of Elijah would sneak back in, but I knew that it was okay. It wasn't going to consume me. Not anymore. I didn't need him. And as time went on, I realized more and more that I didn't want him back. What we had was gone, and I was starting to see that the only person I really needed to fix things was me. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was finally on the path to being whole again. It's funny how time works. At first, it feels like the days drag on forever, like the weight of everything that's happened will suffocate you. But then one day, you wake up, and it's like you've been living in a fog and the mist just starts to clear. Slowly, quietly, but steadily. And when the fog lifts, you realize something. You're okay. Maybe even better than okay. That's where I was. It had been a few months since Elijah and I parted ways, and while there were still days when I missed the life I thought we had, I could see now how much of that life was built on lies, on manipulation, on things that were never truly real. And I was done. Really done. I remember the day I knew it for sure. It wasn't some grand epiphany or a dramatic moment where I had some big realization. No, it was just a quiet Sunday afternoon. The kind of day where the world feels calm, where nothing feels urgent. I was sitting in my kitchen, sipping coffee and reading through some emails. My phone buzzed, and I glanced down. It was a message from Elijah. I should have ignored it. I should have deleted it and gone about my day. But for some reason, I opened it. Sam, it read, I know I've messed up. I just want to know if we can talk. I don't want to be this person anymore. I miss you. I read it. I stared at the screen. The words blurred together for a second. And then I just put the phone down. I didn't need to reply. I didn't need to explain myself or try to find closure. I didn't need him to make things right. Because here's the thing I finally understood. He doesn't get to be part of my healing. He doesn't get to walk back into my life and pretend everything is fine, just because he's sorry now. He had his chance. He had plenty of chances. And he chose to walk away from me long before I ever left him. So, I did what I needed to do. I blocked his number. I deleted every text, every message, every reminder of what we had. I wasn't being cruel. I was being strong. I was doing it for me. For the person I had become since walking away from him. And with that, the last loose thread was cut. I spent the rest of that Sunday not thinking about Elijah. Instead, I took a long walk along the river, just like I had done so many times before. But this time, it felt different. I wasn't running away from my past. I was walking toward my future. The peace I felt was something I hadn't had in a long time. The kind of peace you get when you stop holding on to things that no longer serve you. When you stop letting someone else's mistakes define you. I didn't have all the answers yet. I didn't know where my life was going, or if I was ready to dive back into dating, or if I'd ever trust anyone the way I trusted Elijah. But I did know one thing. I was going to be okay. I could finally breathe without that heavy weight on my chest. I could smile again without it feeling forced. I could look in the mirror and see the person I wanted to be, not the person I had been when I was in that relationship. I had become that person again. The real me. The one who had been buried under layers of doubt, lies, and hurt. And now, I was living my life on my terms. I wasn't broken. I wasn't lost. I was whole. I walked back to my apartment that night, the air crisp and clear, the city lights twinkling in the distance. I wasn't thinking about Elijah anymore. I wasn't thinking about the past. I was thinking about what was next. And that, in itself, felt like freedom.